In a forgotten village hidden far away from the eyes of powerful kingdoms, where dusty winds carried the smell of dry earth and where time itself seemed to move slower than anywhere else in the world, there lived a girl named Amara whose life from the very beginning was shaped not by love or acceptance but by judgment and rejection that came without reason and without mercy, because in that village people believed that a person's worth was written on their face and not in their heart, and so, when Amara was born with features that did not match the narrow definition of beauty that the villagers worshipped like a law, she was silently marked as different, and that difference quickly became a burden she would carry for the rest of her life. As she grew older, children would laugh at her when she walked through the village paths carrying water from the river. Women would whisper behind their hands and pull their children away as if her presence might somehow stain them, and even men who should have known better would pass cruel comments disguised as jokes that made her feel smaller every single day. Yet what made Amara different from others was not how the world treated her but how she responded to it, because instead of allowing bitterness to grow inside her heart, she held on to a fragile but powerful belief that her worth was not defined by the eyes of people who never truly saw her, a belief that came from her mother's last words before she passed away when Amara was still very young, words that told her that the world often misunderstands those who are kind and that true value is not always recognized immediately but always exists. And those words became the invisible shield that protected her from breaking completely even as life continued to test her every day. So she learned to live quietly, to walk without expecting acknowledgement, to help without expecting gratitude, and to exist without needing approval. And over time she became known in the village not as a person but as a label, a name replaced by a word that followed her like a shadow, a word that hurt more each time it was spoken. Yet even then she never allowed her spirit to turn cold, because whenever she saw someone suffering she would still step forward, whether it was an old man struggling with heavy firewood or a sick child lying unattended or a neighbor who needed help gathering water during harsh weather. Amara would be there. Without hesitation, even if the same people she helped would later forget her kindness or mock her appearance. And when night came and the village grew quiet, she would often sit alone under a large baobab tree watching the endless sky filled with stars that felt distant yet comforting, whispering to herself questions that had no answers, wondering if somewhere far beyond the limits of her world there existed a place where she would not be judged before she was even known, where silence would not be mistaken for weakness, and where kindness would not be treated as something ordinary. Meanwhile, far away in a kingdom built of shining stone and golden towers where the sound of marching guards echoed through wide palace halls and where every decision carried the weight of thousands of lives, a young king sat alone despite being surrounded by advisors, servants and nobles, because although he was powerful beyond measure, and had everything that wealth and authority could offer, he felt an emptiness that no treasure could fill, because everyone around him spoke carefully, acted carefully, and behaved as if life itself was a performance meant to impress him rather than connect with him. And this constant lack of truth slowly created a loneliness that even a crown could not hide, until one day he made a decision that surprised his entire kingdom, a decision that broke tradition and challenged expectation. He announced that he would choose his future queen not based on beauty, wealth or political advantage, but based purely on character, honesty, and the ability to care for life itself. And this announcement spread across villages like fire across dry grass, reaching every corner where young women suddenly found themselves dreaming of palaces they had never seen. And in Amara's village, excitement erupted as girls prepared endlessly, stitching dresses with bright colors, borrowing jewelry from relatives, practicing perfect smiles and reflections of water, and speaking constantly about how they might become queen, while Amara remained silent through it all, watching from a distance, knowing that in a world where appearance was everything she had nothing to offer. And so when the royal invitation arrived she initially refused to go, believing it would only lead to humiliation. But an old woman she had once helped during a storm approached her, and spoke softly but firmly, telling her that destiny does not always choose the confident or the beautiful, sometimes it chooses the forgotten and the overlooked, and those who expect nothing are often the ones who receive the most unexpected gifts. And though Amara hesitated deeply, something inside her stirred, a feeling she could not ignore. And so on the morning of departure she quietly followed behind the group of beautifully dressed girls as they made their way toward the palace, receiving laughter and mocking remarks along the journey as villagers pointed at her and questioned her courage or her sanity. Yet she continued walking step by step through fields, across rivers, along dusty roads that seemed to stretch endlessly, feeling every insult like a stone on her back yet refusing to stop because something deeper than fear was now guiding her forward. until finally the massive gates of the royal palace appeared before her eyes, towering high like something from another world. And as she entered, she felt an overwhelming sense of difference between her life and the world she was stepping into, where everything was polished, controlled, and designed to impress. And inside she saw hundreds of girls standing with confidence and pride, each one believing they were destined for greatness, while she stood quietly at the edge trying to become invisible as she had always done. And when the king finally entered the hall, silence fell instantly as his presence commanded attention. But instead of choosing, immediately he surprised everyone by announcing that there would be a test rather than a selection, and that each girl would be given a small garden to care for over several days, and the one who showed true understanding of life through her care for the garden would be chosen. And confusion spread through the hall because this was not what anyone expected. But the king had grown tired of appearances and wanted to see truth. And so the next day each girl was assigned a patch of land within the royal gardens, and while many complained or attempted to delegate the task to servants or simply ignored it altogether, focusing instead on appearance and confidence, Amara knelt down in her assigned soil without hesitation, placing her hands into the earth as if reconnecting with something familiar, something real, something honest, and for the first time in a long time she did not feel judged, only connected, and she began to care for the garden with patience rather than pride, removing weeds gently, watering seeds carefully, and treating each small plant as if it mattered, as if it had a future worth protecting, while others treated their gardens as obstacles or performances meant to impress unseen judges. And over time differences began to appear. Some gardens withered from neglect while others grew artificially without depth or strength, but Amara's garden slowly transformed into something alive, not because of speed or force but because of genuine care. And even the royal gardeners began to notice that something about her work felt different, something unspoken yet deeply real, a quiet harmony between effort and life itself. And when the final day arrived, all the girls were gathered in the grand hall once more, tension filling the air as the king walked slowly among them, observing not their faces but their actions, their energy, their intentions, until finally he stopped in front of Amara, who instinctively lowered her gaze, expecting rejection, as she always had in life. But instead there was silence, a heavy, meaningful silence that seemed to stretch forever before the king finally spoke and declared that she was the one he had chosen, not because she was the most beautiful in appearance but because she had shown the rarest quality he was searching for, true care without expectation. And instantly the hall erupted in shock and disbelief as many could not accept what they were hearing, questioning how someone like her could be chosen above all others. And in that moment the old woman stepped forward, revealing herself as a royal advisor who had disguised herself to observe the candidates, explaining that the test was never about gardening but about character, about how people behave when they believe no one important is watching them, and only Amara had shown genuine kindness and sincerity even when it brought her no advantage. And the king then looked at her and said that a crown is not meant for the most admired face but for the most honest heart. And as those words settled into her mind, something inside Amara began to change, not her appearance, not her past, but her understanding of herself, because for the first time in her life she was not being judged but seen, not tolerated but valued. And although her journey into the palace would bring new challenges, expectations, and struggles she had never faced before, that moment marked the beginning of a life where she was no longer defined by the cruel words of others but by the truth of who she had always been beneath all the judgment. And in the end her story became a silent lesson to everyone who once ignored her, proving that the world often fails to recognize true worth until it is forced to look beyond appearances. And sometimes those who are called nothing by the world are the very ones destined to become everything they were always meant to be.